this episode, we are discussing the background of past lives. So we're going to get into some really cool facts, some interesting theories, some ideas for you to explore, as well as talk about a few really influential people in the field of researching past lives and finding out cool information. So I'm excited for you to hear this episode. This is the Intuitive Girls Guide with Heather Wood and Jamie Hayhurst. Let's get started. Hey, Jamie, want to talk about past lives today?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So on this episode, we're talking about past lives, and we want to give you sort of the foundations, like history, facts, like the basic information about past lives. And since this is our very first episode, so exciting, we wanted to just give you a little quick explanation of who this podcast is actually for. So, Jamie, will you tell them?
Yeah, absolutely. So this podcast is for everyone. It is called the Intuitive Girls Guide, but the intuitive girls that are mentioned in the title are us, as myself and Heather. That sounds a little exclusive, but we're just referencing ourselves. This podcast is not just meant for intuitive girls. It's meant for anyone that's intuitive, no matter what your gender identity is, no matter where you fall. In the binary or the non-binary, you are welcome here. And even if you don't even identify as intuitive, we still want you here because this stuff really applies to everybody. It might feel new and uncharted. So however you identify anywhere, you're welcome here.
Yes. Please come and please listen. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about past lives. So basically, past lives are the belief in reincarnation, right? I think when we say past lives, we're referring to lives that we've lived, like times we've incarnated before and experienced, different things in different times. So I totally believe in past lives. I've done different things where I've tapped into my past lives before. I love it. Like, Jamie, what are your thoughts on past lives?
I absolutely believe in past lives. I have not yet been able to tap into my own past lives, but I have done sessions with people that have helped me with that and helped me see past lives that I've lived. And I'm 100% on board with past lives.
Awesome. So reincarnation, then, I think when I was doing my research on past lives, we kind of have to start there with like that concept and that idea. So reincarnation in Latin, it translates to entering the flesh again. I know, right? I love that. I love that so much. I feel like the flesh part like really sticks out to me. Like it isn't just like showing up as yourself again. It's really showing up in a completely different form. And it really like speaks to that idea for me of the fact that like you're not a body, like you're a soul in a body, right?
Exactly.
The other little fun fact I wanted to give you, because I just like this term, is reincarnation. The Hebrew word for it is Gilgal, and it means rolling. Isn't that kind of cool?
Well, that is cool. Like rolling from one life to the next.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
love that. Okay. So when I was trying to find the origin of reincarnation, like where did this idea start? It was almost impossible to find.
Right.
The best guess is that it started in India, with the second runner up or the first runner up being possibly somewhere in Asia. The reason why it's so hard to track the origin is because the idea of reincarnation was basically just widely accepted by everybody.
Right.
The idea that reincarnation isn't a thing is a much newer belief than the idea that, past lives have been lived. Like that was kind of what everybody believed before.
Right.
And really this idea of there being a cyclical element to life, and not just in humans either, in animals, in plants. Like even I found references to past lives of vegetables, believe it or not.
Right.
that life was this much more cyclical experience than just like one time you live and then you die and that's it.
Right.
And I know that in a lot of the stuff that we've studied, Jamie, with like the divine feminine and like pagan beliefs and all of that stuff, that's that's kind of central to that whole way of thinking, right?
Right. I mean, everything is cyclical. Seasons, the menstrual cycle, everything about life is cyclical. So it only makes sense. It feels like at the dawning of modern patriarchal religion that it stopped for some reason because there had to be an incentive for towing the line, you know?
100%, 100%. So I found the belief in reincarnation in things like Hinduism, Buddhism believes in it. They refer to it as rebirth,
Yeah.
but the same idea.
Right.
Jainism, Sikhism, pagan, like we mentioned before. And then where it's not is Christianity. And then I looked into Judaism as well. And so there are some sects of Judaism that they do believe in it. But for the most part, not so much.
Right.
So those I would say are the two quote unquote modern religions. So
Right.
I think the idea of, this is one life, and kind of referencing what you said before, you earn your place in heaven.
Right.
The whole concept and idea of heaven doesn't really work if you use reincarnation, right?
Right. Yeah, that the guilt and the pressure and the fear of getting into heaven or to hell doesn't hold if you're coming back to do some more work, if you're coming back as someone else. So it doesn't work.
It does not work. So interestingly enough, though, when there's a bunch of different polls, so I just kind of combined what I found into one. About half of the people polled, and this is a American poll, so take that with a grain of salt. About half said they believed in reincarnation, which I think is kind of a high number for the percentage of people who probably are consider themselves Christian or Jewish. So I think that's an interesting thing too.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that's very interesting. But I also think that there's some sort of you hear many people talking about like she's an old soul or she's something about. I think that past lives are easy to accept when you're looking in the past. You're looking behind you. It's when you start to look forward and you are questioning the ideas of heaven or hell or the afterlife that it gets harder to get on board with past lives. So it's sort of that, like, maybe part of it is that American way of viewing things, like sort of twisting things a little bit, like it's okay to believe that I'm an old soul and I've lived other lives, but going forward, I'm applying this other theory, right?
Absolutely. Because when it's sort of like the surface level of it
Right.
is easy to like fit
Right.
into your life, right? Like, oh yeah, I sort of believe in that concept. But the like real kind of nitty gritty of it, and like you said, applying it to like, oh, is this life going to affect the next life? Like that becomes something that I think a lot of people just kind of opt out of.
Right, because you have to do some real fundamental analysis and potentially some real changing of how you view life in its entirety, like the whole way life works. If you have to dig deep and reassess some of that stuff, it's easy to just be like, meh, I'll think about it later.
Right. Like I think I'll go distract myself with social media instead
Right.
of diving into the universe's greatest mysteries. Totally get it. Yes,
Right.
100%. But even to that point further, in the 1950s is when we kind of see past life regression therapy become something.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, I was kind of surprised it was as late as the 50s. I guess I think of the 50s as much more of a like conservative time.
Right.
Um, if you asked me to guess, I probably would have said 70s. But the 50s is where you see this kind of like movement almost start of people really diving into this more. So I think that's where we start calling it past lives instead of reincarnation, is because of this particular therapy that becomes pretty popular. And past life regression therapy is a form of hypnotherapy where they take you back through time to previous incarnations of yourself, by us like accessing your subconscious and triggering that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that's what that is. So yeah, the 1950s sort of saw the rise in that, and I think that's where the term, when we refer to past lives instead of saying reincarnation, I think that's where that kind of originates.
Don't you think that some people would say that they believed in past lives, but they didn't believe in reincarnation?
I totally do. I totally think that people have a bit of a disconnect. Like,
Right.
I think of it, when I think of reincarnation, I think of that as the concept of living more than one life, right?
Right.
Like you live
Right.
a life and then there's something in between and then you come and you live another life.
Right.
Past life, when I think of that as like one particular incarnation, like the time you were here before, like
Right.
a specific part of that.
Right.
Don't think that's how a lot of people see it, though. Like, what do you think?
I agree. I think that reincarnation feels like an entire system or an entire process that's harder to get on board with when you're breaking free of this of a Christian or modern religious mindset. I think it's harder to do that.
It does not fit into a patriarchal mindset at all.
No.
It does not work. It just doesn't.
No.
So, all the more reason to talk about it.
Exactly.
Some major philosophers were digging this concept, though. Reincarnation, not so much past lives, but
Mhm.
people like Socrates and Plato they wrote about it, they studied it, and it's clear when you research that they believed in it. And even good old Ben Franklin references it and talks about it.
Really?
Weird, right?
Yeah. It's weird.
Good old Ben believed in reincarnation.
Oh no.
One of the things that when you talk about past lives or when you talk about reincarnation that I hear a lot of people say is, why can't we remember our past lives? If this is true, if we reincarnate all the time, why don't we remember all of those times? And so, I mean, I have an answer to that, but what do you think the reason might be?
Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, I think that we're here to live this life. I think that what happened in our past lives can be helpful to that. I think that there are lessons that we're all learning throughout our lives, our collective lives. But I think if we knew everything, if we had this memory of every lifetime, I think we'd lose focus of what we were doing here and now in this lifetime.
100%. I completely agree with you. And I also think that having all of the memories of past lives and arriving as like a little baby, like that's a lot of trauma to take on the ride with you. Like
Yeah,
that
the
would
human
be
brain can only manage so much.
right. That would just be a lot to sort of filter through to do what you just said, to like live this life.
Right.
So they have a term for why you can't remember them. And
What
I
is
love it. It's divine mercy, is what they said.
it? Ooh,
I
I like
mean,
that. Yeah, that's actually perfect.
I think, and I think that is a really great way to explain it. Sort of like if you were born and you had these real active memories of your past lives, that would be rough. Like to remember your death, to remember people who wronged you. So yeah, and when we do the episode where we tell you some stories about past lives, we both have studied a couple of different people to tell you about. I think you'll see that maybe those people would have been better off not knowing. What
Yeah,
do you think?
right. It's complicated, and I think those people lost track of their current lives. I think they got absorbed in that past life and verifying it, and and then you lose track of what you're actually here to do.
100%, 100%. And it's the stories that we're going to tell you are both of people who had active memories of their past lives as very young children. So
Right.
that's it's a bit of a childhood robbery to be.
Right. I mean, our look at how our brains are processing a global pandemic. right? Like there's a lot to process. There's trauma involved. Never mind like managing the thoughts and the actions and the experiences of previous lifetimes as a baby. I
Yeah,
mean,
no.
it's too much.
This life that we're in is hard enough.
Enough. Exactly. Exactly.
So, a couple of cool theories I wanted to tell you about and get your thoughts on, Jamie. The first one is that the idea that a birthmark that you have, any birthmarks, signify how you died or a major injury you had in your last life. What do you think about that?
I'm sure. I'm certainly on board for that. I think I think the universe works more in like in clues and signs, and I think it's a lot easier to tap in and figure out your past lives through things like that, through learning about them, about learning different like healing modalities and different techniques. So I think it's a much more subtle way to learn about your past life through that than it just like slamming into your memory, you know?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's much more how I believe, and I know you look at things this way too, where I think the universe is always giving you opportunities to take control and to be an active participant or take an active role in your own growth and your own
Yeah.
healing, right? So it's sort of like, oh, here's a little birthmark to
Right.
explore. Like that seems way more in line with how I view the universe is working. I don't have any birthmarks. Do you have any birthmarks, Jay?
I do not. My
Ooh,
children do. My husband does, but I do not.
ooh, interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. Hmm. Well, I mean, I have a little knowledge of some of my past lives, but I'm wondering if maybe in the last one we were both like drowned witches or something. So we
I
probably
was
wouldn't
just
have.
going to say drowning, and you don't have a scar from that.
I don't think that would show up. So yeah. And then the other theory is that phobias, so not just fears, but actual phobias that you have, um, are actually past life trauma that you didn't finish processing. I think I love that one even more. What do you think of
Ding,
that?
ding, 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 ding. Yeah, 100%. Those have happened to me before. Like when I've hit certain milestones in my life, I've developed not necessarily phobias, but issues with certain things, like issues with enclosed spaces, some claustrophobia issues. And I think that after having spoken to you about it, Heather, I think that like we can draw the conclusion that that was something that happened in a past life, that milestone that I hit in this life triggered.
100%. When you can't really trace the root of a fear, especially when it's a phobia, because phobia is like this interesting like animal in of itself, right? Like it's this like weird fear reaction that you have to something that a lot of times is illogical. Like for me, I totally have a phobia of spiders. It doesn't make sense. I could easily squash it. I live
Right.
in Massachusetts. There's not like a lot of real dangerous spiders
Right.
around, but I have a weird panicky response to them. And I always think like I must have been like murdered by a pack of spiders in a past life or something because I don't understand where this comes from. But yeah, certainly things like enclosed spaces. For me, I could feel a phobia when I was with my family at a water park going down like an enclosed water slide. I was like, oh boy, it was like flashing between other lives for me. Like this,
Right.
oh, there's something here, and nothing like that happened to me in this life. So I definitely think there's some validity to that, and it's something worth exploring for sure.
Definitely.
All right, I want to tell you about a few really instrumental people or influential people in the study of past lives. So I'm going to start with Dr. Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim Tucker.
Okay.
So they were psychiatrists at the University of Virginia. And Dr. Jim Tucker is the protege of Dr. Stevenson. Dr. Stevenson has passed away. If you are a person who is like me, where you enjoy going down YouTube rabbit holes, Dr. Stevenson, Dr. Tucker too, but Dr. Stevenson has some really interesting videos. I will tell you though, just a little helpful hint, up the speed when he's speaking to like the 1.5 because he is like the slowest speaker in the history of talking.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Super fascinating human,
Right.
talks very slow. Okay. So they were psychiatrists at the University of Virginia, and Dr. Jim Tucker is still working, but they dedicate their lives and their careers certainly to past lives and studying them. They are where we have the most information and research to really go on, at least when it comes to like modern times with this.
Okay.
Now, something I want to say is that in other cultures, like if you went to India, there probably wouldn't be as much information because past lives aren't like a phenomenon over there.
Right.
They're just
Given.
accepted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
So I think like keeping that in mind when I'm telling you like we have so much research here.
Right.
It's from a very like American point of view of like we invented this. Like you have to keep that in mind. You have to keep
Yeah.
that in
We invented it and we must now document it all.
100%. Okay.
Right.
So they investigated over 2,500 stories of past lives. And so they have this very skeptical point of view. They call it a skeptical spirit when they go into this. However, when you read or listen to them talk about it, it's very clear they completely believe in past lives.
Right.
Sometimes I think people feel like they have to say that skeptical part. Do you know what I mean, Jay? Like,
Do. Yep.
in order to like believe them, if they tell you they were really skeptical or they have that story, I don't know, I feel like they like that.
Right. Like it validates it for them.
Yeah, and no judgment, because I would imagine especially if you started in like the 50s, I mean even starting now, and you're like a well renowned psychiatrist and you're going to go into a field like past lives, like no judgment that you feel like you have to create the skeptic story first, but it's just kind of, I don't know, it's like tale as old as time. We got to be a skeptic first.
Right. Like, right. If you've changed your mind about something, it validates it for some reason rather than just fully believing in something.
Yeah, it's like a very masculine energy, logical
Right.
place sort of apology for being a bit woohoo, in my
Right.
opinion.
Having to provide proof.
Yes, exactly. So they studied children,
Hmm.
only children, past life stuff. And they would look at kids between 2 and 3 years old. Now,
Okay.
before I tell you more about this, we both have children.
Right.
Uh, both of our both of us have children who I think completely agree with believe in past lives, and some of them have told us about some of their past lives before.
Yes, they
Not
have.
weird in our families.
No. No.
But at 2 and 3, I don't know about you, my kids were just asking for like a snack. They weren't telling me about their past lives then.
No. Not at all.
Yeah. So I would say this like that's weird in a good way, I think.
Right.
Like that stands out to me. Um so I'm going to tell you what their criteria was
Okay.
for studying somebody. But what they did is they would declare cases solved or unsolved. And they
Okay.
were very careful not to say true or untrue. But basically, what they were looking for is there enough criteria for us to say we believe that we can prove that this was a past life experience, or is there not? So that's why they chose solved or unsolved. I feel like that's an important point to make.
I agree.
I think too often in our society and our culture, we're like, it's right or it's wrong, where we don't
Right.
need to take that stance so dramatically. Everything doesn't have to be so polarized.
Exactly.
So they put in this solved category just over 50% of their cases. Again, kind of a high number, in my
I,
opinion.
yeah.
Okay. So the criteria that they had for who they would study was kids between 2 and 3 years old. They would make statements that sounded like, "When I was big, I." So that was a sentence they would look for.
Okay.
Um, Rejection of the mother. So for a kid to say, "You aren't my mother," I have a different mother. They would look for that specifically.
Yikes.
That's going to be a rough day as a mom.
Yeah, that's the tough one to hear.
Yeah. Reference to their house that they're living in being too big or too small. Just the fact that they would have anything to compare it to would
Right.
be one of their red flags.
Right.
And then the other thing was sentences that sounded like, "Before I came to you, and they would talk about that.
Okay. Makes sense.
So That's pretty strict criteria in my mind, especially for 2 and 3 year olds.
Yeah,
And they
absolutely.
had over 2,500 that they investigated, which means that they had a lot more, but that's how many they went for. I think that's pretty amazing.
I agree.
So they were really looking to prove that these kids were remembering their past lives.
Hmm.
So I have one other person to tell you about, and he was more looking for adults to remember their past lives to heal things in their present life. So I wanted to bring up both of those. Um, but before I do, I wanted to just add one more thing to this. 70% of the time in the kids that they were studying, the kids remembered an unnatural means to their death, meaning they didn't just die of old age or illness. There was something unnatural about their death.
Interesting.
They also found that the average interval between lives, this surprised me. What's your guess, Jamie? How much time do you think is between incarnations?
I mean, a lot. I would think decades, right?
That's what I would have thought. I would have been like 50 years or something.
Yeah.
The average they found was 4.5 years between
Well,
lives.
yeah,
I know.
that's a quick rebound.
That's how I feel. So I have my own theory about this, which I have no evidence to prove, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
Hear it. Let's hear it.
Because I think so many of these kids, like 70%, are remembering their lives and they had an unnatural means to their death.
Yep.
I'm thinking that if you had a very traumatic, unnatural death, that maybe you come back faster. And because you came back so much faster, maybe as a kid you remember the life more. What do you think?
Right. I agree. I think that makes perfect sense. I don't think it's probably not the way it normally works, but I think that all lines up to make a lot of sense.
Okay. Well, that's my theory. So
Yeah,
there
it's a
you
good
go.
one.
Okay. All right. So the other thing, um, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we tell you the stories of some of the people who have amazing past life experiences. But um, most of the parents of these kids are like, when their kids are telling them about their past life, they're shocked to their very core.
Really.
So my point to this is that people like you and I, when our kids talk about past lives, are like, wow, this is so cool. And we probably call each other, but we're not like, our systems aren't rocked.
Excellent point. That's a really good point.
So we're not going to make a huge deal of it or seek out, people in psychiatrists in the field. Like we're just like, oh, cool. How can you use that information for your life? You know what I mean? So I
Right.
do think it's worth saying that like a lot of the cases they're studying are in cultures that the idea of your kid kind of proving to you that they have reincarnated it would rock your life.
Right. Gotcha. That's a very good point to make.
Okay, so the last person I want to tell you about real quick is Dr. Brian Weiss.
Okay.
Uh, so I'm a fan of his. He's like all up in the Hay House stuff.
Yep.
So I've like done a lot of his things. So he's a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist.
Hmm.
He also has a skeptic story, much like our friends Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Tucker.
Right.
So he was working in psychiatry and hypnotherapy. And in 1981, during a hypnotherapy session, his patient accidentally, and I just put that in quote fingers and nobody can see it but you, Jamie, but um, the patient accidentally regressed into a past life.
Uh,
So I don't believe many things are accidental like that. But so that happened, and um, the woman in her past life saw herself drowning.
ooh.
And guess what she was there to deal with? Like, guess what she came for hypnotherapy about?
Oh no. What?
Her phobia of water.
No.
It was,
Dun,
right? So after she went through this life, and Dr. Weiss sort of like led her through the process, even though he was thinking it was not really happening, she began to heal really quickly. And for like her phobia was gone.
Of course
So
it was.
yeah. So
That's
he
the
was
whole
like,
point.
exactly. Maybe there's something to this. And then it really sealed the deal for him to believe in it when during another session, she was in between lives.
Okay.
And while she was there, gave him basically a medium reading. Like, she connected him with his father who had passed and his infant son who had passed, and gave him like information that nobody would know. Like, when he tells the story, he's like, there wasn't even an obituary about my dad. Like, there was no way she could know the
Wow.
information she knew. So good old Dr. Weiss then dedicated his life to past life regression therapy and how you can use it to heal fears and phobias and other traumas in your current life. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes spirit, like we said, like spirit is very subtle a lot of times, but when you have that much of an intuitive impact, past life regressions plus a medium reading and one theoretically like traditional therapy session, I mean, it's hard to ignore that. You know,
Very.
it was obviously like something that he needed to witness so that he could get on this path.
100%, 100%. And I think it's a lot of people that I know who do hypnotherapy work at some point stumble into the arena of also doing past life regression as
Right.
part of it. Because I think when you start going into people's subconsciouses,
Right.
there's a wealth of information there that wants to, your intuition wants you to heal. So it's gonna sort of bring that stuff up.
Well, it's much like anything in life. Like you can direct things as much as you want and keep them as normal, quote unquote, as you want, but eventually you're going to get where you need to be as far as healing and intuitive stuff and all that stuff you might be trying really hard to ignore. It's going to keep getting your attention.
100%, 100%. I totally agree with that. All right, so that's all my fun facts that I have for you about sort of the foundation of past lives and reincarnation.
I love them all. Those are a lot of facts and they were incredible. I mean, really, really fun.
It's nice to have an outlet for my incessant need to research things. So that's very thank you for letting me tell you all of this stuff.
Well, it's perfect. And now hopefully people can learn from that. I mean, that information's out there, but it's hard to even know where to start looking for that. So we will take your obsession and learn from it.
Thank you. All right. So, in our next episode, Jamie and I are going to tell you how you can use past life information, therapy, regression, meditation, digging in, how you can use that in your life. And Jamie and I have two past life meditations that we're going to do. One
Mhm.
of them, both of them kind of are regressions. So, and we're going to share our experiences with you about those. And then we're also going to link those so that, you guys can go and listen and do that and hopefully share your experience with us too. So that's what's coming at you next time. So thanks for being here. Thanks
Yeah.
for listening to me, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for chatting. Super fun.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. You got anything else you want to add, friend?
No, absolutely not. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.